Coming up,
There are a couple of common mistakes. The most common one is, I would say that it is designing for technology rather than designing for operations. Basically, we don't face issues related to the products itself. We basically face issues related to the surroundings of the system. Our business model, we basically do what we call hardware as a service. So basically, we're not selling equipment to most of our customers. We are providing a critical communication service. Basically, you have to tell the truth. That's it. It's simple because I have just defined it, but when you are in the field and you feel the pressure, you want to overpromise, for example. You want to be as fast as you can. I don't see broadband networks replacing classical LMR networks, but definitely they're going to complement themselves. And I would say this is like the future. And serving is a people business. We also have to understand that behind a big blue chip company, there are people, and we have to understand them and to bond with them.
welcome to Making Waves, the podcast where we explore the technology, people, and real world challenges shaping the world of critical communications. From PMR radio to next gen broadband, we talk with industry experts and frontline users to uncover the pain points, innovations, and decisions that define performance under pressure. If it keeps teams connected when it matters most, we'll be talking about it here. I'm Stuart with my co host Lona,
Hello.
and this is Making Waves. So, Lona, what do we have today?
Designing a critical communication system is one thing, making it work flawlessly in the field is another. Today, we're going to put a spotlight on what that means in Latin America's largest economy, Brazil. Joining us is Matheus Silva, the COO of Alcon-Kofre. Matheus comes from a strong engineering and business leadership background, and his team is responsible for delivering mission-critical systems across the vast landscapes of Brazil. Matheus, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Before we get into the details, could you just briefly introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about the work that Alcon-Kofre is doing?
Of course, of course. I'm really glad to be here with you guys. My name is Matheus. I also go by Matt. I'm the operating partner of a fund called D1 Capital. It's a private equity fund focused on mission critical communications. We have so far three operating companies, Alcon-Kofre and Anytopos. We treat them as a whole, and altogether we have around 700 employees, more than 1,000 enterprise customers in Brazil. We manage over 850,000 subscribers, mostly radio terminals, in almost 1,000 networks. We started the business with LMR technology, but we also have expanded our operations for private broadband networks as well.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Matheus. Today, we're going to be talking about the balance between business engineering and operations, how to find the right blend of reliability and cost, and the specific challenges faced in Brazil compared to other markets. We're going to be talking about where you see the future of critical communications heading, and finally, the real world user priorities as you see them every day. Stuart, I'll now hand it over to you for the opening question on the reality of the Brazilian market.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much, Lona, and welcome, Matthias. So let's bring it down to a Brazilian context then. So Brazil presents a huge geographic and operational and economic challenge for you. From your perspective, what defines success in critical communications in this type of environment?
That's an amazing question for us to open up. And I would say that there is no silver bullet, but there are a couple of common mistakes. The most common one is, I would say that it is designing for technology rather than designing for operations. So when we talk about a geography like Brazil, you will have two different realities: global companies operating locally, and of course they will have this state of art requirements for systems, mission critical systems, including IT requirements, strict SLAs, and so on. And of course we have to understand and to serve that kind of customer. But we also have local big players that are more focused on cost efficiency, and they also have this need for mission critical communication. So I would say that success is achieving the customer requirements rather than building on top of the most advanced technology. And that's the definition of success that we have within our operations when we talk about customers.
So when we talk about state-of-the-art requirements and strict SLAs, a lot of the conversation is around engineering and reliability. You've got some technical principles that you employ when you roll out your deployments. You've got to talk about redundancy versus cost. You've got some environmental and infrastructure constraints. From an engineering standpoint, what are the most common design and operational mistakes that undermine the reliability of mission-critical networks in your part of the world as you see them?
We serve different end markets, including mining, oil and gas, pulp and paper, industrials. But we have seen this pattern, whereas basically 90% of the issues that we have are related to power supply mostly, and second to networks. So if we could like nail down the design problems and operational problems that we have, we're basically talking about problems that are not the core technology of critical communication technology, right? So the challenge for us in designing and also operating critical networks in Brazil is basically designing the everything around the system itself, not only the system, because then we'll have a backup for the power supply, power banks, and so on. And the same thing for networks. Of course, we'll have between 3 and 2% related to the technology itself, but it's not something that we are working as the main priority, because technology, when we talk about classical LMR networks, Tetra, DMR, we already have amazing vendors. Basically, we don't face issues related to the products itself. We basically face issues related to the surroundings of the system.
I think you already covered the next question a little bit because you were saying these were also related to the operational side. But if we just look into the actual installation realities, the training, the handover, and the massive task of maintaining 100% uptime over the long term, things I assume can get very complicated very quickly. So my question is, once the system is live, what operational challenges tend to surface that aren't obvious during the design and deployment phases, especially given the wide range of environments you work with?
In that part specifically, I will step out of the technology discussion and the engineering discussion, and I'll bring the financial and operations discussion. So our business model, we basically do what we call hardware as a service. So basically, we're not selling equipment to most of our customers. We are providing a critical communication service. And the challenge is actually being up to date with the customer's requirement throughout a relationship of over 10 years. That's like the average time that we keep a customer within our customer base. So it's investing in its operations, and they'll have to scale the number of devices and infrastructure and so on. Eventually they are cutting costs, and they will have to downsize the network as they're driven in that time to a cost goal, for example. And basically being up to date with the customer requirement is the most challenging, is the challenge that we're focused on once we have deployed the network. And of course, after deploying the network, between the go live date and around 2 years, between 18 months and 2 years, we'll have this phase where the customer is understanding the real requirements, because it's common for a customer to start with a critical network for operations, for example, and then the safety team see the technology working and wants to jump in the network as well. So we have this phase where we're still designing and optimizing the network, but once it's mature, it's basically understanding the customer requirement and being up to date in terms of the customer need.
That's very, very interesting. And your model is different to many others that we would have as partners around the world. So you're not selling hardware, you're selling a service. You're not just selling equipment. It is a critical communication service at the end of the day. And I was going to ask you a little bit about, kind of business as usual, and you've already touched on it. So let's dive into it a little bit more. The business reality is, as a customer, you either go, usually the typical model is you go with an operator or you buy your own private network. But there is the cost of ownership. How much do I need to have the must-have communications? So there's budget pressures, there's phased rollouts to consider, there's life cycle thinking, which you are now taking all on board if you're having your own network. However, in your model, you're offering a service. Given what you said about, the real requirements of the network don't materialize till typically 2 years after the deployment because it's still maturing and they realize how they actually want to use that network. How do you convince the customers upfront that you are the guys to go with that model, as opposed to just diving in with a regular tender for a network?
Yeah, that's an amazing question, and I will split that answer into two parts. The first part is actually let me think about it. So basically, we have to cover the total cost of ownership,
Mhm. And
and
how do you convince them that your model is the right one? Because at the moment, they don't know what they want until 2 years later, from your experience you're finding.
all right, I will just clarify the our business operation before answering, and then I will split the how we convince the customer in two buckets. The first one is the environment, the geography itself, and the second one is the business model that we have developed. So basically, we do not build public networks. We build private networks. So when we close a customer, we're deploying equipment that for most cases that specific customer is gonna use. So if we're talking about a miner, for example, and I build a network for a customer, that network specifically is going to be used basically by that specific customer within its operational context. So we're not a public carrier. We cannot be compared to, for example, broadband public carriers. So it's easier to have a strict SLA. In that case, we have a field team that support the operations, and it's basically a private network, but the equipment is ours rather than I'm allowed to share a public network with the customers that we have in that specific area. But to convince the customer about the total cost of ownership and why it's better to go through the HaaS, as we call it, hardware as a service business model, rather than basically deploying the capex and hiring someone to support it. Basically, we have two buckets. The first one is the environment. We're talking about Brazil, and we have, if the not highest interest rates right now, one of the highest for sure. So the cost of capital is something that pushes the customer to the second business model, basically preferring house, because then the customer doesn't have this upfront investment. And of course, we do have it at a lower level because we are heavy buyers of critical communication equipment. But again, we are absorbing this heavy capex that we have in that kind of project in our balance sheet rather than allowing the customer to have it on its own balance sheet. That's some environmental and some specifics of Brazil itself, that the business model that we do, which basically has. But also, when we go to has operation, it's easy to explain to the customer that if they need more equipment, we're going to be available to deploy the equipment. If they need less equipment, we're going to be absorbing the equipment that they don't need anymore. So throughout the years of operation, we basically absorb the demands that the customer have. And with that, we make their lives much better, because now you don't have to, every time you want to run a maintenance shutdown, for example, you don't have to acquire new equipment for that. You basically are renting for us. You let us know a month earlier of the maintenance shutdown. We'll ship the equipment, it's ready. Once you don't need it, we just take it back. If you want to grow your operations and then you're hiring construction teams, for example, it's going to be a 12 months project. We can send the equipment and take it back once the project is finished. So it's basically easier to explain it to them. And most of the customers in Brazil, they have already understood that situation and they prefer the house business model rather than doing capex.
Good, thank you. Let me move on to users, trust, and adoption, because you told us about hardware service and total cost of ownership. But at the end of the day, these systems are only as good as the people using them. So when you're dealing with change management and trying to meet user expectations, it really all comes down to the feeling of confidence in system when it is needed the most. So my question is, what role does user trust play in the success of a critical communication system? And how do you earn it?
If not the main role, one of the main roles, definitely. Because serving is a people business. We got to understand our employees. We have to understand how they are serving the customer, but we also have to understand that behind a big blue chip company, there are people, and we have to understand them and to bond with them so we can work together in difficult environments and situations, like when we have an incident, for example, and we have to recover the voice recording of an LMR network. We feel that the team is really stressed out. They're being pressured by other teams to deliver the voice recording and so on. So everyone is stressed in the company, and we have to be together with them. So trust is really important when we have critical operations like ours, and you build it by basically it is pretty simple but not easy, I would say, and basically you have to tell the truth. That's it. And it's simple because I have just defined it, but when you are in the field and you feel the pressure of your customer, you want to overpromise, for example, you want to be as fast as you can and eventually got something not right. So telling the truth as soon as you know it, not over promising. And we have this culture of doing what we say and being careful with the words and the promise that we do with the customer. I would say that is the path that we have been using to build user trust in our customer base.
That is not only is it a nice ethical way to do business, it's actually very really refreshing to hear that as well. In a world where competition is always high and people are working to deadlines and targets and things, having this kind of ethic where trust is the most important thing and having a service contract is primarily about serving. That's really interesting to hear that's your main. When you get asked that question, that's how you answer it, and it's all about the people. The business is the people. And I love that answer. But now I'm going to change tack. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution and the road ahead. So yeah, it's everyone that comes on to the podcast will get a similar kind of series of questions where we talk about LMR, longevity, the road to hybrid LTE environments, and future-proofing the investments of, not just from your point of view, but from the deployments and the services that you give to your customers. So protecting and future-proofing those types of investments as well. So looking ahead, how do you see organizations in Brazil preparing for the evolution of what's to come without jeopardizing the reality of today?
I'm not sure if this is like the reality that we have in Brazil or it's a wild phenomenon, right? But I basically see our customers pushing us to do more hybrid operations. And when we talk about hybrid operations, I'm talking about Tetra networks, communicating well with LTE networks, hybrid devices, private LTE networks, falling back to public networks, for example. So basically leveraging the technology that is already in place or is going to be in place for different use cases harder than the voice application itself. Because by the end of the day, our customers, the humanity, we don't need LMR, right? We need communication. That's it. LMR, like Tetra, GMR, is the technology that we're solving for this problem right now. And once other technologies are emerging, like broadband, private broadband networks, customers they want to leverage this technology up. And this is something that we have been putting much effort in understanding and also in preventing customers to not jeopardize the reliability because the application or the use case is not fully developed, for example. So right now, we do not recommend any critical voice over LT. We understand that technology is evolving for achieving like the maturity that we have with Tetra networks, for example, but it's not there yet. And we don't want to give up something that we understand. We know how it works. We know in case of failure how to investigate and how to solve for, because we're running mission critical operations on that kind of system. And to go to a technology that are not fully understand or fully developed yet. Although we are supporting customers to connect both networks, to deploy the devices that connect to both networks, to run the applications that are going to be used, I would say, in the next 10, 15 years. So we're exploring with them. So the way that we have worked with customers to explore new technologies and to build future proof systems is exploring the hybrid use cases that we have right now so we can understand without jeopardizing the reliability that we know and we can support with classical LMR networks.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Shall we continue to the rapid fire round?
Why don't you introduce the rapid fire round, or we'll take it from there.
It's just really three quick questions with quick answers, and then we would just round it up for today. So the first one, what is the one lesson every COO should know?
I'm really focused on the people. I'm really focused on employees, customers, and the relationship that we build with them. I'm not sure if every COO should be focusing on that.
Okay.
It's what you focus on. So, as you may have guessed, these are a little ad hoc, and they're in no particular order. So, my question is, what would you say is the most underestimated risk in critical communications projects?
Not fully understand customer operations before designing a network. You have to understand not only the technical requirements, but also the customer operations. If we talk about open pitch mining, for example, they're basically changing the geography of their sites, right? So you gotta put some cell over wheels for that kind of environment. So and you just design, you just solve for that problem if you are the one that is also understanding the customer operation. So I would say that not fully understand the operation is one of the risks that we have when we build critical networks.
Mm. How do you actually acquire that kind of knowledge, though?
That's a tricky question because we basically we bought these businesses that have been doing this for the past 30 years. So most of the knowledge that we have today was built throughout 30 years of history. And as we serve the main end markets for this kind of technology, we already have that kind of knowledge when we design a network. So when we talk about mining companies in Brazil, for example, we serve 17 out of the 20 largest mining companies. When we talk about oil and gas, we serve 10 out of the 10 largest customers. So we already have some knowledge about how they operate, how an offshore platform, for example, use our kind of technology. But for new end markets, the way we do it is basically being close to vendors and running proof of concepts, right? We do not test anything with the customer if the customer doesn't allow it. So basically, we explain that we do not fully understand and we want to understand a little bit better on the field, not in a lab. And we basically deploy the equipment, spend some time understanding how the technology behaves in that kind of environment and how operations could leverage the technology. And once we're comfortable, we go back to the engineering phase and basically have this final project contemplating not only the technology, but also the customer operations.
I was just going to say, I can see how your business is growing through the service side rather than just selling a system and walking away, because you're taking the time to understand how is this going to be deployed? What are the real needs of the users on the ground? If you don't know, you're going to investigate hand in glove with that end user as well. That very much shows that you're a very service oriented company. So I can see how that works. That's a great answer.
I'm glad to hear that. And, it's something that we have tried to also provide to our customers. As we have this deep knowledge about mining, for example, we have the best practice for safety teams, for example, for a first responder process. And of course, when we talk about a huge mining company, a global mining company, they already have their process, right? But we're building this white label process that are up to date with what global companies are doing. Once we close a new customer, we do not only provide the equipment and the services, we also hand to them best practice for operating a first responder service with an Alemar network. So we try to serve the customer not only with radio technology, with RF technology, but actually by matching their needs.
The last one, what is one trend you believe will shape the next decade?
Yeah, hybrid terminals and also cost effectiveness. We have like hybrid Tetra DMR slash LTE 5G networks, applications, devices. This is something that we see there's no way around. I don't see broadband networks replacing classical LMR networks, but definitely they're going to complement themselves. And I would say this is like the future. And the second part of the answer, radio technology, LMR technology is pretty mature right now. So most of the use cases, most of the issues, they have been solved already. Not that there are any fronts to develop, but as the technology matures, I would assume that we'll see some price pressure because like R&D investments, they're going to slow down a little bit. So I would say that the first one is hybrid, connecting more than one technology and ensure that voice and data, they work well regardless of the technology, and also being as cost efficient as we can be.
I could spend a lot longer talking, but I know that you have meetings to go to after this recording. So I'm going to draw us to a close now. So let's see if we can touch on some of these things some kind of way of a wrap up here. We've touched on the reality of the critical communications in Brazil specifically, and you've given us some insights into your world of how you survive within the market of Brazil. We've talked a little bit about the engineering for reliability, the developments and operations, the business reality of cost of ownership versus the service model. And I loved your answer earlier about being in the service model is primarily about service and serving and the trust your experience goes one way and the trust comes back the other way, and this is how your business is growing, and it's a very ethical way of looking at it. The evolution and the road ahead, you've talked about the LTE, the hybrid, but the fact that classical and traditional LMR solutions are not going to disappear anytime soon. If anything, they will be complementary for the foreseeable future. So I just want to say thank you very much, Matheus, for spending a little bit of time with us here today. And I would just call down to the listeners, if you want to find out a little bit more, then Matheus is definitely on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to him. Not that I'm wishing to spam him with lots of people, but if you have a genuine need to reach out to Alcon-Kofre and learn a little bit more from Matheus, I'm sure he'd appreciate your contact and would put you in contact with somebody appropriate depending on your inquiry. I would just suggest that you go along Google Alcon-Kofre Brazil and you will find the website if you want to go through that medium as well. If you found this interesting, then you might want to subscribe. We are available on all of the major platforms, Spotify, Apple, etc. And by visualizing this podcast, you'll also find us on YouTube to make things very easy for you. We've put all the links on our website. Just go to damcellular.com/podcast. So once again, thank you very much, Matheus.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Luna. It was a pleasure to be here. I'm always open to discuss technology with you guys. And thank you for the long-term partnership that we have developed between our companies. And I'm looking forward to keep that for the coming years.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And thank you very much to my co-host, Lona.
Thank you. And I also just want to thank you, Matheus, for being on the podcast. Thank you very much for the insights. And thank you, Stuart.
I've been Stuart. This has been another episode of Making Waves, and until next time, goodbye.